All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 9th of October, 2024, and this is the SIG Cluster API meeting. SIG Cluster API Cluster API is a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle of the Kubernetes project, and as such, we follow their meeting guidelines, which basically means please treat everyone as you would expect to be treated, or explicitly so. Please be kind to each other. And if you would like to speak, please raise your hand and I will call on you. All right, so with that out of the way, at the beginning of our meetings, we like to take a little chance to give people an opportunity to say hello if you've never been here or you've never met the community before. So I will be quiet for a few minutes, or not really that long, but if you would like to say hi, please raise your hand or just unmute yourself. All right, I am not seeing any hands going up or people unmuting themselves. So don't worry, you'll have a chance next meeting. We'll come back to this. So let's look at the open proposal readouts. I think I saw Guillermo here earlier, and I think the in-place updates is the only one we have right now. So I don't know, Guillermo, did you have an update you wanted to share with us?
Nah, not really. I answered most of the comments. There are still a couple pending, mostly feedback from Alberto and Vince, I think. So I have a couple ideas that I want to try. They were asking for more examples, etc. So I've been MIA for a couple of weeks, but I still have it in my to-do list. It just has gotten busy lately over here. But yeah, still working on it. Again, if anyone new who hasn't participated in the review is interested, please chime in. Otherwise, I'll get to this when I have a little bit of time, but I haven't dropped it.
Cool. Yeah, no, sounds good. And yeah, like life gets busy sometimes, right? Okay. Well, let's move on to our discussion topics then. So the first one, well, we only have two, but the first one is from Stefan about the updated machine drain rooms. So please, Stefan.
Yep, just want to mention that basically I did an iteration of the proposal. There were a bunch of comments. Thanks for the reviews. I think there was nothing really controversial, but yeah, I tried to address the comments that we had. And yeah, please take a look if you're interested. Otherwise, Fabrizio had a sub point.
Yep, thank you, Stefan. So I was wondering if we can, since the feedback are good, seems that the idea resonates to almost everyone, and the proposal is not a big one. I was wondering if we can set a lazy consensus by the end of next week, and if no one have objections.
Does anyone have an objection to that? Looking like the 18th of October as lazy consensus date. All right, I'm not seeing any hands going up or people unmuting, so I will take silence as no objections to that. Maybe if we could just, I'll make a note on the PR there.
Sounds good.
Or is there already a note there about lazy consensus?
No, I think we are planning to discuss it first and then.
I'm going to add it, Mike. You can keep going with the meeting.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, that's one piece of business done here. Stefan, you've got the next item about the new cluster cache implementation.
Yep. So I don't know who knows what this is, the cluster cache tracker. But yeah, let me give you some context. Because I don't know how much it is used in infrastructure providers. It's used in a lot of places in Core Cluster API, also like in CAPD and CAPV, but I don't know how other infra providers are doing this or if they it another way. Okay, so what is this component? Basically, we have a separate component that is responsible to create controller runtime clients and caches for communication with workload clusters, which also does a bunch of stuff like health checking and recreating it. Basically, when a connection drops, we are getting rid of the client. When it comes back up, we create a new client. And the idea is basically that not every signal reconciling every single controller creates a new client and does everything from scratch, but we basically have per workload cluster one client, one cache available all the time that is cached within the cluster cache tracker. And that one takes care of it. So this component evolved quite a bit in the last 1 to 3 years. I would say it's gotten better in general, but I think we just hit a few fundamental limitations with our current approach. Those are basically the first 4 bullet points here. So the way that this worked today is something like, so we create this cluster cache component, we pass it in to a bunch of our other controllers. So like the cluster controller, the machine controller, machine deployment, machine set controller. I think the machine deployment controller doesn't have it. And then as soon as one of those controllers wants to access a workload cluster, it basically calls get client on the cluster cache. And this get client call on demand tries to create a client for that cluster. The problem with that is essentially, what if like 10 controllers at the same time try to create a client for the same cluster? So one option would have been all of them are trying to create a client concurrently, but what we currently had was that basically only one controller is allowed to create this client and the other ones are blocked, which is not really great, but it's the best option we had. The problem with creating clients is not necessarily the happy path, because if it works, it takes, I don't know, a few milliseconds probably and everything's good. The problem is when workload clusters are offline, and especially when a high number of workload clusters are offline. So let's assume you have like 500 clusters and 100 of them are offline. So what actually happens is that that reconciler that tries to create a client will run into a timeout. So basically, it will try to create a client for currently hard-coded 10 seconds. That entire reconcile will be blocked for those 10 seconds. And afterwards, it will get an error back. And then the next reconciler will try this, fails, and goes back. So basically, our scalability is really, really bad if you have a lot of workload clusters that are not available. And basically, pretty randomly, other reconcilers are getting blocked because all of them are like taking like turns and trying to create a client and failing. So that was one thing that was not great. The other thing is that the current cluster cache, once we are able to create a client, it will create one Go routine per cluster to run health checking. So we split up a Go routine basically and then run health checking like every 5 or 10 seconds. That basically means if you have like 1,000 or 2,000 clusters, you have 1,000 or 2,000 Go routines alone just for health checking, which also doesn't really sound great. I hope we don't have a leak in there, but just the pure numbers are not good. Let me see. Yeah, and then there's a bit of minor things, like for example, I think just the way it was implemented, it was relatively complex, but the complexity was not necessarily needed for what we tried to achieve here. And the cluster cache tracker basically consists of 2 components. So basically you first have to create a cluster cache tracker, which is like mainly the thing I just described. And then there's a corresponding cluster cache reconciler that you also have to create and register for the managed. So that also needs to be running. Now, of course, what happens if you have like 2 components and one of them is like, let's say almost optional, is that people forget to use the second one. So even in Core Copy, we had a bunch of places where we just forgot to register both. I think it was not in production code, probably only tests and stuff, but that's still a bit annoying. So what I did is basically, we had those topics like going on for like a year or something where we always think like, okay, yeah, that's not really ideal what we're doing here. Maybe we should do this better. And then basically Fabrizio had this proposal for improving status. And then we were coming up with a bunch of additional requirements because now on top of what we already had, like being able to create clients for workload clusters and cache them, we had an additional requirement that we basically wanted to be able to get information out of the cluster cache about the connection or the health checking state. And instead of trying to also like throw this in somehow and try to make this work, we basically thought, okay, let's re-implement this whole thing. So there's still some code that also took a while to get stable before that is still in there, which is just the same. So just the way that we create clients and caches and all of the stuff is basically copy paste with like 5% change. But the entire logic around the way that we did locking, the way that we were spawning up the Go routine, that's just an entirely new implementation. And basically here in the first task, introduce new cluster cache, that is the PR for it. Yeah. So the way that this now works, just a very high level overview is basically, so instead of what I just explained before, the way that this old thing works, the new thing works like that. Basically you create this one cluster. So we also renamed it from cluster cache tracker to cluster cache, by the way. So you set up this one cluster cache component, you register to the manager, and that's all you have to do as someone who sets it up. And then just like before in other reconcilers, you can just call get client or something to get your client. What is different now is that a cluster cache is basically one single reconciler. And that one single reconciler tries to create clients. If there's not already a client for a cluster, it does self-checking, also in the same reconcile function. And if there's a disconnect, basically it gets rid of the old client that doesn't work anymore. So we put this all into one single reconcile. And just because of a few guarantees that control runtime gives us, like one unique cluster is only reconciled once at a time, we were able to simplify a bunch of locking, essentially, just incidental complexity that we had before. Because we have that one single reconciler doing all the work, including health checking, we are not spawning up separate Go routines anymore. So this new cluster cache per default will just run with 100 workers, which means basically at roughly like, let's say 90 clusters, we are at break even regarding the number of Go routines. And afterwards, it's just good. We don't need a 1,000 or something. And those 100 should work very well. But yeah, you can just basically increase the concurrency with a flag if you need more. I would assume that if you have just very wild guesses, but let's say you have 2,000 clusters or something, and maybe 10 or 20% of them are offline, I think the 100 Go routines are probably still fine. But if you have more, you just increase the number, and that's fine. Yeah, so as I was saying, one fundamental change, this reconciler is now responsible to create clients, delete clients, and also to do health checking. What about the other reconcilers? So basically, the only thing that they're now doing is they will only ask the cluster cache, like, is there a client available already? If there is one available, they will just take it. If there's none available, they will just get an error back. So there's no like actively blocking all the other reconcilers anymore. Okay, I think I touched on most of the relevant points. I don't know if anyone is more curious and wants to review the PR. Or you got some reviews from Christian and Fabrizio. Thanks, by the way. Yeah, that's it.
Yes, I mean, it sounds like a fascinating problem, even though it's very, you got to kind of cut through a lot of details to understand what's going on here. But thank you for explaining it, Stefan.
Sure.
Does anybody have questions or comments about this? Fabrizio, please.
Yeah, first of all, you're right. This is one of the most fun and interesting part of Cluster API, in my opinion. I just want to say, yeah, what we had before wasn't ideal, but it was capable to run with 2,000 clusters. So it wasn't not so bad. We definitely collected some idea when doing that test. And now we have this version that we consider much better. And if we sum up this version that is not blocking other reconciler with the new version of the Drain that is not blocking reconciler also, we think that those are two huge improvements for let me say, reaching new scalability issue. Stefan did a great job to make some tests around scales. But just for information, and since we are in a community, we did not have yet time to run a full scalability test. And if someone is interested to run a scalability test in Cluster API, it's not that difficult. We have an end-to-end test job. It's just a matter to have a beefy machine It is only require a beefy machine, and you can run an end-to-end test, changing the number of cluster and looking at some metric. So it should be not so complex, and it is really fun and interesting. If someone want to, or if they run internally and scalability test, if they want to give a try to this new version as soon as it merges, or they want to run this test, it will be very welcome to, if we can get this done before the release.
Yeah, thank you, Fabrizio. And Stefan, please, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know if you already mentioned it because I broke my own audio for a minute or something while you were talking. One nice side effect of that was basically we now enabled a race detector for not for all the unit tests, but for the unit tests for all our production code. So like capd or something is not yet running with the race detector, but capd is not that important. But everything else is. So very surprisingly, we didn't find any issues yet in, let's say, the pre-existing code before this PR, but we already found one issue that we would have accidentally introduced with this PR. Just maybe a general advice also for providers, if you don't enable the race. I mean, I know usually with controller runtime, if you don't do anything crazy, it's relatively safe, but I also know that some providers are sometimes doing a bit of crazy stuff with controller runtime. Yeah, so I don't know if you have a bunch of non-trivial concurrency thing going on, I would highly recommend to enable the Go race detector in your unit tests, just to be a bit safer.
Safety is good, especially at scale. And I just want, before we move on here, I just wanted to echo some of the chat comments here. Stefan, there's a lot of kudos for your description and for the tests you put together and the work you've done here. So thank you from an appreciative community. All right. Does anybody else have questions or comments about this? Okay. Oh, there we go.
I forgot one thing.
Okay.
So this PR mainly just adds the new cluster cache implementation. There are a few follow-ups in the issue that I have to see how soon I get around to it. But one thing I definitely want to do before the minor release goes out is deprecate a current cluster cache tracker. So probably I think I didn't mention it at all, but in this PR, I'm not changing anything about the current existing component. I'm basically just adding like an entire new component, which is implemented like in a similar way. And the plan is essentially that core cluster API and capd, we are already moving everything over to use the new component. And the other one will stay around. I think like rough timeline would be probably deprecate with 1.9 and delete with 1.10 or something. I personally don't mind if you have to keep it around 1.9 version longer, but if it's just sitting around, people can technically also just copy it away if they want to keep using the old one for some reason and don't migrate yet. But just, yeah, that deprecation will be coming because, of course, we don't want to maintain both implementations long term. And then one other thing that's a little bit lower priority, but definitely will be done on top is that we also integrate metrics in the cluster cache. So we will have metrics that basically describe or cover connectivity to workload clusters. So you will be able to tell based on Prometheus metrics and stuff. Yeah, the uptime, let's say, to some degree, the uptime of your API server. If you don't have that already in some other ways. And every controller that uses the cluster cache will have that. So you, let's say, on one side, you have the information to some degree how your API server is up overall, but you also have specifically the information which of the copy controllers was able to communicate with that, because that's not necessarily the same, right? I mean, it could be that your workload cluster is always up, but the network problems are in your management cluster. So with that, you will get that information just overall that when outages happen, et cetera, you can figure out via metrics how the connectivity broke exactly.
Are those the per controller metrics? Are those all like, are they separate metric series, or are they labels on one series or something?
No, what I would do is basically build the metrics into the cluster cache, register them in that controller runtime metrics registry. And what will basically happen is we have that cluster cache once in core copy, once in the KCP controller. So of course, every one of them will just expose the metrics for itself, but for all the cluster it's talking to. So, and then if you collect the metrics from core copy, from KCP, et cetera, and put them all into your Prometheus or wherever, then you will get them across that. So I guess the answer is, yeah, I mean, the metrics will have the same names and all of that stuff. What I would assume is that if you, let's say, if you would curl the metrics manually from those controllers, they will look identical across controllers. But of course, usually when you scrape metrics from controllers, you add some additional metadata where the metrics are coming from. And those will be the labels where you can differentiate between, okay, this metric was coming from the core copy controller or it was coming from the KCP controller.
Cool. Sounds interesting. Okay. Any other questions, comments, amendments? Going once? Going twice? Okay. We'll move on to provider updates then. Richard, you've got the first update for Kappa.
Yep. So just to follow up from last week where I mentioned that all of the Kappa AMIs had been deleted or were being deleted. So the update is they're all pretty much gone now, the ones in the old AWS account. But the good news is we've got access to a new CNCF account, and that's all been set up now. We've got automation in place to start building new AMIs. So we can't realistically go back and republish all of the old historic AMIs. So we're probably just going to take maybe the first, well, I guess the last three major minor versions and republish those, starting with the most recent patch. There's a caveat to this as well. So we're encountering some issues with RHEL or Red Hat based OSs. So initially it's only going to be Ubuntu versions, sorry, and Flatcar. So that will be the initial one. We're going to update Kappa and do a patch release so that it starts to pull from this new account as soon as those are available. Big caveat is with the newer versions of Image Builder images, it's got a new version of Cloud in it, and that currently breaks Kappa as well, because we do some funky stuff with Cloud in it. So we need to get that sorted as well, and that will be in the next release. But long story short, we're getting it fixed, and hopefully it'll be fixed soon.
Cool. Thank you. And thank you for making progress on getting those images put back up there. Because, yeah, that I know it's been causing a lot of disruption for people. So appreciate it. Okay. Carlos, you've got an update for CapG.
Yeah, thanks. So more than an update, this is more of a question. So hopefully it's right to ask it here. But so we have an office hours meeting for CapG, which is not really in the Google group, in the cluster lifecycle Google Calendar. And we made the request, or we tried to make the request a few months ago to have like an official meeting for CapG. But we were told that the Google Calendar was full. And basically, I think one of the things that people were looking at is that there were 2 cluster API meetings at the same time in the calendar. And so it's just a question. I don't know if anyone had this problem before in other providers or in other special interest groups, but like in other projects, sorry. But do you know who should we contact to try to get one official meeting for CapG? Because it would be very nice for us to have it so people just get the invite when they sign up for the cluster lifecycle group. And we opened some conversations in the Slack channels in SIG Contribex. I think we also did it in Cluster API a few months ago, but we didn't get very far. So if anyone has any tips on what we could do, that would be great.
So I'm guessing you've already reached out to the SIG Contribex folks. I see Fabrizio and Lubomir are both raising their hands, so probably some good advice coming. Fabrizio, you're first.
I leave it to Lubomir. It has more experience than me on this topic.
Okay, Lubomir, you're first.
So I'm going to quickly explain how the propagation of calendar events works. We have a personal sequence lifecycle calendar, which is bound to the Google Group sequence lifecycle. We can add an event in that calendar bound to the Google Group. And then there's this mechanism of automation that will take any new event and reconcile it in the public community calendar. So there is a little diff, it will apply the new event that we just added. That's how the propagation works. However, I was told by, I believe this is Mr. Bobby Tables from Contribex, that we have so many sub-projects that we are choking the automation and we cannot propagate further events to the community calendar. That's basically the whole story. At some point, we had so many sub-projects that I saw this synchronization automation just stopped working. That's all. How can we fix this is a Contribex problem against Mr. Bobby Tables. He is actually one of the people who are responsible for migrating our mailing list to be community owned. Currently, Google is the owner of the mailing list, and it's something like sequence lifecycle at Google Groups. What will happen in the future is going to be sequence lifecycle at kubernetes.io. But you can imagine that will be a breaking change to, for example, this document we are currently on the screen. We have to change all the links that we have. At that point, we will also be able to propagate again our personal SIG events properly to the community calendar. This is the information that I know. If you already open a conversation with Contribex, maybe they have the latest update. But what I'm told is that we currently cannot create a CAPG event for you in the community calendar. That's all.
Okay, thanks a lot. So yeah, I opened the conversation with Contribex. I didn't get the response yet, so probably will be pinging someone there again. But yeah, that's very good information. Thanks.
Cool. Fabrizio, you still got your hand up. Did you want to add something there?
Yeah, just a question for Lubomir. Since, if I'm not so, recently we freed up some spot in our calendar because we archived the etcd ADM, and probably we also removed the duplication of the CAPI calendar. I know that Vince was looking into it, if I'm not wrong. So just asking, what about we create the calendar and just see if it goes through?
Yeah, so actually it doesn't work. And I don't know why. I think it's just their synchronization tool is not exactly bound on the number of open slots for a particular SIG or anything like that. It's not like we have 10 events cap and then if we free one slot, it's going to be fixed, Recently, the Cluster API operator subproject requested a new event, so I added it. I created a Zoom meeting. I tried creating the Cluster Lifecycle calendar event, and the synchronization just didn't work at all. Like you say, we free etcd ADM, we remove this and that, but the synchronization just blocked at this point, and I have no explanation. It's like I was told again that because of the too many sub-projects, it doesn't work, and that's all. It's a good question. Like, hey, here is the list of sub-project. Do we have like a cap, like a fixed number of 10 or 20 that are causing the problem? I don't know. It's a question for them. And I was told the only exit out of this again is to migrate to community-owned Google groups.
Okay, so Carlos, if you start again this thread, please loop me and Lubomir in. And yeah, maybe I take a note and we also ask to the next at the next SIG chair team, I will bring also this up. So maybe you get a little bit of attention to the topic.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments about that topic?
Just a caveat. Yesterday there was a meeting, the October one. I'm not sure if there will be one in December because there is KubeCon. So yeah, I don't know when this will be the next SIG lead meeting will be.
You mean the SIG lead meeting or the SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting?
The SIG lead meeting.
Yesterday I was in the late meeting. Today there was one in the morning European time. Yesterday's meeting was very busy with. It actually kind of the whole meeting was discussing half of the meeting we discussed the graduation of the gateway API from CRD to core, which was kind of contagious topic, and the rest was how the contributor summit is basically changing in KubeCon. But yeah, I think we can also discuss it just with Contribex. Contribex do have a meeting as a SIG, so maybe we can join and chat with them again. If SWAC is not the medium, we're getting a response. But Carlos, because you brought this topic, I will expect you to also participate and drive because as much as we try to fix this problem, it has not been a high priority for the group because mainly for the problem of too many sub-projects, too many meetings, and it's kind of difficult for us to juggle.
Yes, sure. If we can use this problem to actually fix another problem, that so nice.
Okay. So it sounds like we got some next steps there. Unfortunately, it won't be in the short term, Carlos. But just keep pushing. Okay. So that brings us to the end of our agenda. I'll say if anybody has any last minute things they would like to say, bring them up now or wait till next week. Otherwise, we'll take back about 24 minutes of our day here. Going once? Going twice? Okay, let's call it a meeting. Thanks everyone for coming out. We'll see you next time.